Hello, welcome back to Blender Sushi Live Learning. In this episode, I'm gonna do a little bit of improv on a basic concept, just like how we can displace a surface of mesh using Sverchok add-on, and how I will compare it with a normal Blender workflow if you are using modifier. So it's kind of a revisit of the idea, just in case it's not very clear when I talked about it last time. So if you have like an object in the scene and then you want to kind of deform it somewhat, like this box, for example, the default box. Normally in Blender, you can use one of the modifier. The really good one, for example, you might use is the displace modifier, of course, to displace the objects. And by default, it's really just pushing the objects basically in the normal direction. So you have choice over like the texture coordinates, whether it's local, UV, objects, global, and you also have these options to kind of use the RGB data to XYZ data from the image and then using normal, custom normal, axis direction, XYZ. So that's kind of neat. Sverchok actually, if you want to rebuild the whole modifier, it's quite possible for you to do that, maybe just around 20 nodes. Maybe Sverchok needs like a displace modifier nodes at some point. But for now, you have like a bunch of components that allow you to do this anyway. So texture, if you are like using Blender modifier, you simply assign a texture, right? And by default, it gives you nothing because you need to assign like an image or a movie. Normally, I will just use like a procedural texture provided by Blender, like the cloud noise or marble, Musgrave noise, whichever you like. Musgrave is actually pretty cool. It looks something like this. It doesn't, you can't see nothing by default. Actually, if you change the size, you kind of started to see something going on. But you tend to want to have more resolutions because box is really only like 8 vertices, so you want to add subdivision surface, but you have to add it on top. You subdivide it before you displace it, so that's the idea. And you kind of increase the subdivisions and you started to see this Musgrave displacement. Very cool. Yeah, so that's how you actually do it if you are using displace modifier. Fairly simple and intuitive, and I really like this method as well. Sverchok is just an alternative, but you can of course do a little bit more sometimes with Sverchok. With Blender modifier, you also have this mid-level, which is kind of nice, kind of like a limit. I think clamping the limit of the displacement. And with the Musgrave, if you select the modifier and jump into the texture, you can always make changes. So this is actually quite procedural in its own. Let me try something. And you have the one that I like to use with the texture modifier, with the texture coordinate, is to use objects, so you can simply point out the empty objects and you kind of move the objects around. You know, that's kind of nice as it is. So with Sverchok, let's try to save this first. This is Sverchok Displace Basic. With Sverchok, you kind of have the ability to do the same. I'll move these objects to the side. So that's, and we have, okay, let's create new object in Sverchok. You can use any of this generator. Plane is a good one to start if you want to make like a kind of like a surface mountain. But we can start with a box. Okay, we have a box here, and we can use the viewer draw. Viewer draw is actually sometimes a little bit faster before we create real objects. Just use a viewer draw. And you can scale the object. You can add subdivision here based on this generator. So that's really handy as it is. And now if you want to do some deformations, there are a couple of ways to do this, but you need to keep in mind how you want to push the vertices of the objects or these points. You can, the quick one of course is to use something like vector noise. vector noise, if you provide like points, it will actually generate some kind of noise, and you can choose any of this noise value, and you can kind of simply add the current position of the points, and this is the current position of the points. Just add them together with the noise here, and then you should get something. Okay, so that's okay, that's pretty interesting. And sometimes you kind of wonder, hey, why is okay, that looks interesting. It's pushing the noise, it's pushing the points of this box, but then you will think like that's kind of a little bit too strong, so you want to adjust the strength, and for that you need another vector math node, and simply just use something like multiply by scalar, and you can kind of control the displacement, although this one is kind of pushing it outward. Really, you want to control it probably from here. Just copy paste it. Now see, we can kind of, okay, we have the noise, and the noise kind of multiplied all in all direction, in XYZ directions. Okay, that's kind of cool too, but maybe we want to having control over the noise a little bit more. So you actually just duplicate this node once again, paste it here, and here you actually have the ability to control the scale of the noise, because with vector noise MK2 we don't have controls like how strong is the noise and things like that. This is like a super basic noise, node, but still pretty powerful. You can do things like Voronoi. If we increase this value, you should start to see the Voronoi kind of pattern appearing. You can turn on and off the points and the edges. You can't see anything if you turn off the edges, so I switch it back. Turn on shading, maybe helps. So that's kind of nice. We can control, that's kind of not very useful. I'm gonna delete this. So I'm gonna save this and save it again. This one, okay, that's kind of controlling the scaling, but it's kind of pushing it that way. Probably not the best, but still okay. This one kind of controlling the scale of the noise. So this one is kind of pushing it in XYZ directions. You can change the seed, so that's okay. You can also do things like if you move the original box, kind of, if you use vector move in here and use some kind of vector and push it in the X or Y or the Z, this actually kind of controlling this vector noise position, so it's kind of swimming effects. So I do this quite often actually. So that's kind of nice kind of effects as well. What else? Other than vector noise, you can also use something like the vector turbulence. There's also other vector noise, I think, but I like these two because they kind of give the vector output and scalar output. You will see the scalar, what's scalar doing next. So with the turbulence, it's you get this kind of something that's like more wavy. I don't know what's the terminology, but this gives this wavy kind of effects. And if we reduce this multiplier, you start to see these things kind of swimming. So that's vector turbulence. And the next thing we need to take care is that instead of pushing it in the XYZ directions, you probably want to push it in the vector normal. So for that you want to use vertex normal, I guess. So plug in the vertices and the polygon data, and you should get the normal. Now with the normal, you probably want to use vector move perhaps. So this is the normal, and this is the original vertices, and we want to multiply it. Give it a try. So this is kind of pushing the vertices in all directions. This is kind of like a displace modifier, but it's pushing it in the normal directions. And for the noise itself, if we want to use this noise, we just switch to scalar. So this is already two different style of working here. I'm gonna duplicate this, plug this into that guy, turn it into scalar, plug into multiplier. So this one example. So here again we are using the noise node to generate this. Maybe I should add more resolution, but let me check. I accidentally click on vector, so just now. New Berlin. It's kind of interesting. Maybe this needs to be stronger. So I need to use math here. Create multiplier and try pushing it. Maybe I need to pump it up here. So yeah, apparently that's responsible for this noise. That's New Berlin, and yeah, actually it's kind of doing it. Maybe I need to multiply here. It's something like that. Probably it's better if you're using, instead of using box, just use a planar box. This kind of behaving like a displace modifier, sort of. I wish we can have like a mask grafting here. Let me check. Maybe we do have it, but I have not tried. Visual vector in vector. So we have vector noise, vector fractal, turbulence, lacunary, vector fractal. I hardly use this one actually. Fractal give you scalar. Okay. So this plug into this guy, and the value goes into this guy. Okay, that's fractal. Keep getting this kind of noise pattern. So this also another variations of the noise. Let's try turbulence as a scalar. Okay, that's turbulence. We can plug in a frame number into this guy, and it will do its thing. More resolution. Sure, we don't need too big. It's kind of doing the noise, but I kind of think that I might be doing something a little bit incorrectly with a move. I don't know, maybe you can use a vector add, vector math. Just give it an add. So the original vector goes in there, and then this vector normal goes in there, and this goes in there, and just use a scalar multiplier for the vector, and we can now plug in this guy. So that's kind of doing something slightly different. Maybe that's actually better. Yeah, I think that's probably a little bit better. And we can try using all these different pattern. There must be a way to get like a Musgrave texture into Sverchok. I have to think a little bit, but this is like the basic displacement example once again. So with all these nodes, right? If, for example, you want to make changes, Blender has this cool thing, like if you hold shift and then you just draw on this guy, it will kind of merge all these lines into like just the two input. For example, this in this case we need vertices and polygon, right? And the next thing you want to do is just simply use other thing, like for example, if I just use the torus and just plug the vertices and the polygon into this guy, we should have the torus now. See, it's very, very easy because everything is procedurally generated. So you have a lot of flexibility here just to test things. So you can spin it. It's kind of nice. I remember the developer of the torus as well, and yeah, and then you have a lot things like icosphere also. It's very neat that you have all this. Okay, that's very, very high detail, so that's kind of nice as well. Control, slice, and then you can use something like plane MK2, center it, and plug this guy in there. Increase the size. Now we have this. It's kind of pushing it in all directions, not just normal. Kind of interesting. And if you like, you can use triangulate mesh. Just triangulate this guy. So you have different meshing. Actually, triangulate doesn't work with this guy somehow. It's giving an error. Interesting. Ah, because of this. Okay. Now we have triangulations. Somehow I have a feeling that the normal doesn't work 100% here. If you want, there's another method to work. Like you can use this object ID out, and this guy is actually, yeah, this one will give you the normal and all this kind of like geometry data as well. This kind of useful if you are using something like from outside. For example, I will use Suzanne. Just grab Suzanne here, and if we just plug in the vertices and polygon, we should get Suzanne here. Like so. So it's another way you can work with this guy. So object ID is definitely probably more like an alternative. If you like to use object ID, you just search for object ID and you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Currently you have 7 nodes, but they are really powerful because you can easily set mesh using object IDs. So this is kind of like more advanced nodes in a way. This one actually goes more into the component level, but this one kind of in object mode, but you can quickly go into the components and modify the components further. So yeah, something you can try yourself. for now, really just, I think, try get used to this one first. So this is one way, like quite a few ways you can generate like displacement, just like this displacement modifier in Blender. Maybe this can still be enhanced and turned into a single monad nodes or something to generate this displacement. I think because it's I think it's really worth it to go through to make a single node that does the displacement if you need to do that, because this can be quite intimidating, more or less. It's kind of, for example, I don't know, with the normal currently it's like pushing this plane in all directions. Maybe you don't want that. Maybe you just want to have vector in, you know. There's another option, just push it up, for example. So currently it's like kind of doing nothing because this should be plugged into this guy. Oh, I know why I made a mistake here. I didn't plug in the normal. That's why. So vector normal just goes. Yeah, I think this is probably not the most correct way to do it. Vertex normal and put this guy here, put this guy there. So that's kind of pushing it in normal. If you just want to push it in the ups and down, then you use this. And then you play around with the scalar value. So a lot of ways. I think I need to tidy up these nodes. Maybe I don't need to record it. I'm just gonna tidy up these nodes. Maybe group some of the nodes. So yeah, so that's a whole kind of demo on a couple of nodes you use in Sverchok to kind of simulate Blender modifier, more or less. But you can do a lot more here, definitely. You will see. If you know a little bit of math more, you can definitely make your own setup with the nodes here. Okay, so yeah, hopefully this is useful. Let me know if you have feedbacks or even suggestion to make this better. And thanks again for tuning in. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye.